I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to dye a new to me yarn base, KnitPicks Eco Superwash yarn. I am super excited about this yarn base, and what makes it really interesting is that it is 70% superwash fine Highland alpaca, 30% nylon. This yarn is so incredibly soft and smooth, and I don't think I've ever dyed an alpaca nylon blend that didn't also have wool, and it's superwash alpaca. This yarn is very affordable and similarly priced to KnitPicks Stroll, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And since this is the base I've dyed more than any other, and this I'm very excited to see how it performs, I figured let's dye them together and see if we see any differences or not. Before we get started, I do want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my lab partner, Sam. Sam, thank you so much for being my lab partner today, and I am super excited to see how this turns out. Man, it's really funny. Like, in general, whenever I have dyed alpaca, it tends to take more time. It needs a little bit more acid and a little bit more time for the colors to absorb, and they don't strike nearly as quickly as they do on, say, Stroll. And so this is why I want to do some low immersion dyeing with acid dye powders, because I think that that could give us a reasonable feel for how these compare to, say, Stroll, which, as I've mentioned, I've dyed all the time. And oh wait, I forgot. I want to put the deeper nylon zip ties on the alpaca and this bright green onto the Stroll, so that way I can tell them apart. Even though I should be able to tell them apart by feel, but they are very, very similar. There's a little bit more yardage in the Stroll than there is in the alpaca. And so the alpaca fibers also feel a tiny bit denser, but I am very excited. I am going to pre-soak all of the yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes, but potentially a little bit longer. I am curious to see how the Eco Superwash soaks up liquid, because right now I would say that the Stroll, it gets so saturated super fast, and the Eco Superwash is not soaking up the liquid nearly as quickly. So therefore, I may end up deciding to soak this overnight, so that way, well, we'll see. I'm gonna soak it. Yeah, I wanna give this a fair shot at being a good comparison. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this soak overnight, so that way the Eco Superwash can be really, really saturated. My hesitation here comes from the fact that I'm doing a comparison. And in some cases, if you don't mind if there's white left behind, it doesn't really matter if you soak something for 20 minutes or an hour. But given that the Stroll is soaking up that liquid quickly, and there could be some more, I don't know if alpaca has lanolin, but there could be some more oils or something in there, giving it more time to pre-soak will make the comparison between the two, I think, a little bit more similar. But I am very excited, so I'll be back tomorrow, and we will probably start with some speckling and then go for heavier all over color, but at least we can see with speckling. Ooh, and maybe we'll try just like a squirt of some liquid dye just to see how, if I can see how quickly things strike versus spread. That would be pretty fun. Sam, I hope you're excited. For our color palette today, I'm thinking cool tones. And I don't know if I'm going to use all these colors, but I've pulled Sea Spray, Baby Blue Eyes, Peacock Blue, Intense Iris, along with some Silver Gray and True Black. I also have some Liquid Dark Navy, which I know the label says Electric Violet, but it really is Dark Navy, that I want to use just to see how far liquid colors spread and strike. So I think that we will probably start with the navy and a little bit True Black, and then once we investigate how quickly colors strike to this alpaca base, then we will go ahead and explore all these other colors. Our overnight soak has left all of the yarn very well saturated. So I am going to place our Stroll on one end and have our Eco Superwash yarn in the middle. And the reason why I am arranging it like this is that sometimes the one in the middle gets color a little bit differently than the sides. So this will give us two comparisons of the Stroll to the Alpaca. Now I do want to add some liquid, so I am coming in with 8 cups of water that I already added 1 tablespoon of white vinegar to it. A lot of times I'll start with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar per 8 cups of water as a acid concentration that works well with my tap water's pH, but I'm starting a little bit less right now because I want to see what will happen. But anyway, let's heat this up. And since we have some dry dye powder, I am going to soak a skein of KnitPicks Swish DK as a yarn mop so I can wipe any powder off of my gloves onto this while we are working on our immersion yarn. So this will be mostly off camera, but I am going to just quickly pre-soak it in some water with a splash of vinegar. Okay, we are nice and warm. I'm going to reduce the heat to low. And I decided that instead of trying to use a squeeze bottle, I am going to use this little dropper because it'll allow me to more evenly apply the color. So I'm going to do that one and not touch it. But then down here, and I did add a little more at the edges, but I found that with the Dharma squeeze bottles, sometimes they can leak, and so this gave me less of a leak. So actually, this one I won't touch. This one I've left for a minute, and now I am going to spread, and it looks like to me, with this first observation, and I'll set a timer and we'll let this sit 5 minutes. We'll let this sit 5 minutes before I touch it. But my observation right now is that it is striking, not that slowly, but I do think it did strike faster on the wool. I'm not sure how apparent that is on camera, but like if I press in, I still see color here. If I press in, I don't really see any more pigment there. And so this, I got more spread and it felt a little softer, and I still feel a little bit more intensity over there. So I'll come back once the timer has gone off and we'll check here, and then we will also play with some speckles. It has been 5 minutes, and my first observation here is that on the Superwash Alpaca, I see a little bit of spread from the color, and I'm not seeing that spread over on the Stroll. And so if I touch this, okay, it hasn't all set, but it has mostly set. We have more of a sharp line. And the good news, okay, there's a bit over there. It has, I think, also mostly set on the Superwash Alpaca, except for that bit towards the edge. The lines are not as sharp, even with the little bit of spread we have now. So I think colors are striking pretty quickly onto the Alpaca. It's just faster on the Superwash Merino, which is consistent with what I would expect. But I'm very impressed so far. Since I'm starting with a dried out powder, I am wearing a respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, and I'm coming in with the true black. I have reduced the heat to low, and I am very lightly speckling on the powder, trying to both hit some areas that are above the water and below. And I'm gonna go put this away. Okay, zooming in, here is our Alpaca and here is our Stroll. And I would say, anecdotally, things are spreading a lot more on the Alpaca. Let me go take off
my mask.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the spread that we're seeing over here. There's no question that we do have some spread. We have a high amount of water here in the pan, but I suppose there's a chance that the Stroll is a little bit more on the surface of the water than the Alpaca, just because of some like difference in the fibers. But I did make sure to speckle, say, up here where we definitely had the yarn out of the water, and I am seeing more streak and spread over here than I am over here on the Stroll. So I'm gonna let it sit for 5 minutes, and then we will come and move it around. I tend to get the sharpest, tiniest little speckles when I mix my acid dye powder with some citric acid powder and then do the speckling on the countertop, followed by steam setting. Taking care to not rub the yarn very much in the process. And you can still get fairly sharp speckles, low immersion. We're not very low immersion. I would have used probably half the amount of water, so most of the yarn is at the surface. Then when the dye starts to dissolve onto the strand of yarn, there's nowhere else for it to really go. And so you get that color really concentrated in that little spot. Especially if we're also using the dye mixed with citric acid on the stovetop. But I did just want to get that feel for how well and quickly colors can strike. And so I think with this Eco Superwash, and I'll do countertop speckles maybe in an upcoming video, I think that this yarn can speckle beautifully. But a yarn that is maybe just 100% baby alpaca likely would be harder to get sharp speckles on just because of the nature of the fiber. So I think that this first look, before going in and going heavier and really exploring sort of painting with dry powder, which is a technique I absolutely love, I thought that it was worth doing a comparison lightly, so that way we could just help get a feel, so then we might be able to predict how things may happen going forward, which is handy for a lot of things, because there are some techniques where using non-superwash yarn or yarn that are blends where the color strikes slower are more beneficial, because you know you're going to get more coverage. So a lot of times you want to make sure you pick the right yarn base for the technique that you're doing. And well, I'm very excited with where I'm planning to go with this one. All right, 5 minutes are up, and let's first go press. All right, it's looking like it's pretty well set. I see a tiny bit of spread on the Stroll. And after 5 minutes, the colors are also pretty well, I'm seeing a tiny bit of spread still on the Alpaca. So there's no question to me that the black, at least the pigment that is true black, struck the fastest on the Stroll. Not super surprising. One other thing, if you wanted things to strike faster on the Alpaca, I would recommend starting with more acid in the pan, because I think that that would help.
Now let's have some fun. I am coming in with some baby blue eyes, and I am going heavier than what I had done before. My goal is no longer really speckles. I am painting. Ooh, this is a brighter blue than I thought. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be the pastel that I saw on the paint chip, but I don't think I really knew how it might compare to a primary like Peacock blue. So I am curious. I'm going to use some Peacock blue down here just to see, and I'm going to add, before I move them out, a little Peacock blue up here as well. The Peacock blue is going to be more pigmented for sure, but I'm not sure the difference in the tone that we may see. And so the tones of them are very similar. This is the Peacock. If the tone is very similar, then we may stick with just one. But the baby blue eyes looks brighter. The tone in them is quite different. Like this almost looks more, Peacock blue almost feels a little bit greener. if that makes sense. And the baby blue eyes feels like it reminds me a little bit of extreme blue, but I am positive it is less pigmented. Positive. All right, now to warm things up a bit, I am bringing in some sea spray. And the goal is not to have everything feel identical at all. There is going to be, especially once we flip this, some more randomness to the way we are layering these colors. And I'm sure, ooh, this color, it's so funny, it looks so green at first, but then it is still so blue. We will see as we flip the yarn some spread, and actually it's not going very far in the Stroll. Things are striking pretty quickly. So actually that'll be a nice comparison as well when it is time and we are ready to flip. But yeah, let's see. Okay, we're going down a few layers there, but I'm also moving it. But I think that this is all going to be nice and fun. Actually, okay, no, we still have some color there. I'm debating adding a tiny bit more, just for fun. I don't know if I'm going to pull in the iris. I am going to come in and leave some black speckles around just for fun. Because we had some of that there before, so why not? That's going to be very subtle for now. And also a tiny bit, and not as much, and not in as many places. Just a tiny bit of some intense iris, because I like this color. It's a very, it's not very purple at all. It's probably going to be pretty close to the navy. And I'll add some more of that liquid navy on the other side. But I really enjoy painting with these powders directly. All right, so now I'm going to set a timer. We are going to wait. Goodness. Ooh, I think I need to fix the white balance and everything. We're going to wait 10 minutes, and then we will flip the yarn. We're still in our waiting period, but this is a little bit more true, I think, color-wise to what we're seeing. It is gorgeous. I love these colors. Okay, here is our Stroll, and you can see we have lots of white here waiting for us, and you know, we still have a fair amount of white left here on the Alpaca, but I think that more color did go through for sure, but at the same time, I think that it is similar. So this is sort of what I had expected a little bit. But anyway, now we are gonna add some color all over. But since I have this navy dye partitioned, before I speed things up, why not add it and have some fun? I'll probably add a little water to this, but we can help work this through and bring this color more through our yarn. So there's no reason why, I guess, if you're painting with powders, you have to stick with just powders. You can certainly go for liquid dyes and do a combination. But anyway, I just wanted to leave no dye behind. I put my respirator mask safety glasses back on, and I'm still wearing my gloves, and then started layering on these dry dye powders again, using Peacock Blue, Baby Blue Eyes, Sea Spray, and then a little bit of Intense Iris and True Black speckles over it once I had layered the other colors in a way I was satisfied.
I knew that I would need to flip this multiple times to get reasonable coverage. I don't need to have everything completely saturated, but I don't want large white patches left behind either. So I waited 10 minutes before moving the yarn and adding more dye as needed onto these 3 skeins. I noticed when I flipped the yarn inside out that our Eco Superwash Alpaca yarn, the dye had penetrated further than it had in the Stroll, which is consistent with all of our other observations thus far. Whew! I think that I am satisfied. There's still going to be a few light patches in here, but I did flip a few times to check for some light patches of color, and I'm now going to add, this is just some water with vinegar. And I'm going to add that all in because I had that for the yarn pre-soak, but also now the yarn really is free floating here in the container, which will allow undissolved dye access to liquid so it can dissolve and bind to our yarn. I'm going to turn the heat back up to medium heat, bring the temperature in here back up, and then I am going to let it heat for 20 minutes. Turn off the heat and let everything cool off here in the pan. And meanwhile, our yarn mop is steaming on the other side of the stove. I'm going to steam it for 30 minutes. I did let it steam in between some of the flips, so that way I would be able to get more coverage and actually use it to wipe off my gloves. But we will show you that yarn at the very end, and actually when we're ready to wash, once everything is cooled off. Let's wash all of this yarn. How cute is our yarn mop? You can see why I steamed it in the middle, because I had so much dye on my fingers that I just needed to, like with the blacks and stuff, it was sticking to my gloves. And so to have it be a really great mop, it was handy to steam it in the middle. But now, let's see. Okay, so far so good. I don't think Peacock glue, this is just some dish soap. I don't think Peacock glue bleeds, but it may have particles that I'm not remembering. So, I don't know, we will see. But Baby Blue Eyes is pretty fun and exciting. If you're confused why a pre-mixed pastel is so bright and vibrant, it's because there aren't pigments that are pastel on their own. You get the pastel colors by using less of the pigments on something that is white or a different color. So that when they're pre-mixed, there's filler in there so to make it easier to use less. All right, I am seeing a tiny bit of something come out. So let's rinse this a couple more times, and let's see. Oh yeah, that's looking fine. All right, so I'm gonna rinse this one more time to finish getting that soap out, and then I'm gonna put it all through my spin dryer to remove liquid so it dries a little bit faster, and hang it up to dry so we can look at the finished yarn. Wow! The difference between our Eco Superwash and Stroll is bigger than I thought. There is a small, an emphasis on small, chance that I added more dye onto the Stroll because it had more white left behind. The colors didn't spread as far or as deeply as they did on the Eco Superwash. But it looks like, from the way that the yarn dried, then I used like 2 times as much dye on the Stroll as I did the Eco Superwash. The colors on this Eco Superwash are overall a lot more muted. The speckles, as we saw in the pan, things spread further. When we flipped the yarn, we saw that there was more color already on the other side. Both of these indicate that the colors are striking slower to our Eco Superwash, which is 75% Superwash Alpaca, 25% Nylon. So the main difference between the Eco Superwash And the Stroll that's up above is that the Stroll is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. Now, I knew already that color struck slower to alpaca yarn than it did to wool, and that alpaca might need more heat and time. I think that I expected things to be a little bit sharper, which isn't a bad thing. I think that if I were to maybe increase the acid in the pan more, there's a chance that we would have an easier time getting the colors to strike faster. Similarly, if I wanted speckles for sure, if I dyed this on a countertop followed by steaming, we might also see sharper speckles on this Eco Superwash. So I'm not disappointed with the results, but there is more contrast between this and the Stroll than I expected, because I don't think I've ever used Superwash Alpaca before. The one thing that's great is that we definitely don't have felting. There is a tiny bit more grip to the fibers of the Eco Superwash. I think it could work really, really well for doing some color work applications. And I mean, it's just a different fiber base from the Stroll. Both are lovely. I'm excited to dye more of this Eco Superwash to knit with myself. I'm just surprised that I dyed these two with the same technique. Now, one note. The colors look more dusty and muted here overall, but that's because these black speckles that I was adding spread. So it's possible if I hadn't used any black, the color here may have felt as bright as it does over here. It's just because all of these colors blended together a little bit more. But I think that I am comfortable saying right now that if you're gonna dye this Eco Superwash, you probably want more dye to get a similar visual saturation level. And this is one reason why it's worth playing with depth of shade on different fiber contents separately. Because what we see with the Stroll isn't necessarily going to translate to a silk or an alpaca blend. And this is something that we've seen before. I have more of the Eco Superwash yarn in my stash, and I'm very excited to dye it more in the future. What techniques would you like to see me use with this yarn? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm also pretty obsessed with this color combination and want to revisit this more in the future. I love the way that these colors blended together. Don't worry, I didn't forget about our yarn mop, which it's pretty amazing to look at the range of colors we see here, which I think just doesn't have the navy on it, but we didn't use that much navy. And think about how these hues blended to give us this color. It's really all about proportion, but I just think that that's really fun. We have so much coverage and a real layered appearance of these different colors because I did go ahead and steam set this mop that I was using to wipe my hands on in between adding more dye. And if I hadn't steam set it in between, well, I would have needed to wash my hands more because there was starting to get some dye rubbing off on my gloves from this mop. But also, the colors probably would have started to blend a little bit more versus looking as layered as they do. Sam, thank you so much for being my lab partner for this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I learned so much through filming this video, and I am so excited to explore this base more. So Sam, thank you so much for really encouraging me to play around more with some alpaca yarn. If you would like to learn more about how you can become a lab partner of an episode of Dyepot Weekly, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. There are 2 different ways. You can become a lab partner, tell me some colors to avoid, and pick the yarn base so then I can design a video with you in mind, or you can pick from some videos that I have already started filming to become a last minute lab partner. And then I will film some shout outs to include in the video for you. But as a last minute lab partner, you get a little more information about the technique and things I'm gonna do in advance. If you have any questions about them, please feel free to reach out to me on Etsy and I can try to answer your questions there. Don't forget to subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and give the video a thumbs up if you really liked it. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.